Good morning. Everybody hear me okay? Everybody hear me good? My name is Thad Altman. I'm president of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. This is a very, very special day. 50 years ago, we lost an American hero. Standing with me is Senator Tony Hill. Tony is a dear friend, been a great leader here in the state of Florida. He is here to say a few words as well. Tony?
Good morning. Can you hear me in the back? I was, Brother Grant, I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and I asked someone, could they hear me in the back, and the guy on the front row said, the guy said he couldn't hear. The guy in the front row said, hey, you can have my seat. He ain't saying nothing. Come on, y'all, let's get excited. We came to celebrate today. We came to celebrate a great hero. And so, first of all, I want to thank Thad and Andrea for reaching out and making the call. How many people here know that life is all about relationships? Huh? Well, I can tell you that even though Thad was on the other side of the aisle and I was on the other, but we had a lot of things in common as we served in the Florida legislature. And of course, he's still there in the legislature. Sometime, General Bolden, you got to know when to hold and when to fold. So we moved on to some other things. But let me do this because I want to honor your time and thank you so very much for coming for this auspicious occasion this morning. I want to recognize a few people from our great fraternity that is here today. Again, Thad, thank you so very much for reaching out to us and letting us be a part of this historical event. We have in the midst with us today our 40th Grand Ambassador, Tony Knox. And Brother Knox, will you stand? And I want to greet him. Also, our first Grand Ambassadors, Brother David Marin. Dr. David Marin is here from Mississippi, and we're so glad to have him. And then the former Grands didn't think it was Robin, so they showed up as well. So we have our immediate past Grand Ambassadors. Andrew is here from New York, and we're so glad to have him. We have Brother Miller, Grand Ambassador Miller is here, Dorsey Miller. We have also Brother past Grand Lloyd is here, counselor, attorney. Thank you so very much from D.C. And then we have Brother Grace. George Grace is here. Will you please stand? Thank you so very much. And then at our regional and district level, we have our district rep is here, Brother James Sistrunk from Atlanta, Georgia. We have our state rep here, Brother Wimley, Clifford Wimley. Thank you so much. And then I have my co-partner who's from Jacksonville and from the Theta Phi chapter, Brother Woodall is here, Kevin Woodall is here. Thank him so very much for reaching out. We have a past immediate state rep, Brother Rucker is here. Where's Brother Rucker? I saw him earlier. And then we have Brother Jones Jr. who is here. Thank you so very much. On my way back in, I saw, sometime we in the African-American community say it really didn't happen unless you had the black media here. Well, Brother Henry, is he here from the West Side Gazette? Now we know this is official, Sister Lauren. And then we have a young man that kind of wrote the articles and got Thad and them excited and everything about, they had forgot about Brother Lawrence, a hero they had forgotten about. And his name is Eric Johnson with the Chicago Crusader. Where's Eric? Eric's in the house. All right, thank you so very much. Again, on behalf of our great fraternity, you will hear from our Grand Ambassadors in a few minutes, but we want to say to you, Thad, and to the Space Center Memorial Foundation and to the chair, thank you for allowing us to participate today.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Thank you for all your good work and service to the people of Florida and our country now, working in Congress. Our ceremony will begin with the presentation of the colors by the Vieira High School ROTC, then the national anthem sung by recording artist Marva King, and the invocation provided by Pastor Jarvis Walsh. Please rise.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed as the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the rampart we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our Father, we thank you so much for this moment in history. We thank you for those who have come from near and far. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you would continue to guide us as a nation, continue to allow us to celebrate as a people, and unify us as only you can. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. You may be seated. In addition to honoring those astronauts who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country, the Astronaut Memorial has what we call our Living Memorial, where we inspire future rocket scientists and astronauts, engineers, technologists. The building that you're in now is an example of this. This is the Center for Space Education, where we have tens of thousands of students from all over the country come in and out of this facility and learn about space, the experience to visit here and see space firsthand here at the Kennedy Space Center. This is part of the legacy of those astronauts who've given their lives. And our main focus and mission is to keep the dream alive of human spaceflight. So students and teachers alike here to experience that, to be inspired, and to see America's space program. I'd like to introduce you the chairman of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation, Eileen Collins. Eileen has flown 4 space shuttle missions. She's the first woman in history to be the commander of the space shuttle, the first woman in history to land a vehicle back to Earth after being in space. Eileen has been a tireless leader of our organization and has served us extremely well. Eileen?
Right. Thank you, Thad, and thank you, Tony. And also, while I'm here, I want to thank our junior Air Force ROTC unit and Marva King and Pastor Wash for participating in our ceremony. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. And on behalf of our president, Thad Altman, and our board of directors, I want to welcome everyone here to the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. So this morning, we're honored to have with us not only members of our board of directors, but also astronauts, government officials, NASA officials, and special guests. So I'm going to take a few minutes to acknowledge some of these special guests. And please stand when I read your name. Former Kennedy Space Center Director Jay Honeycutt, and Associate Kennedy Space Center Director Kelvin Manning. Thank you. And we have a past chairman of our board of directors, Lee Solid. Thank you. Dr. Steve Feldman, who's a longtime president of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. Laura Shepard Churchley, daughter of astronaut Alan Shepard. Thank you. And we have former NASA astronauts here, John McBride, Winston Scott, and Al Drew. Thank you. We have former Air Force MOL, which is the Manned Orbiting Lab astronaut, Al Cruz. And we have a current NASA astronaut, Stephanie Wilson. And also, the many members of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity are present with us here today, as we know. And they also brought some young people with them, I understand, to honor their fellow fraternity brother, Robert Lawrence. So would you please stand at this time and be recognized? That includes the students. Thank you. Thank you. And so finally, and very important, I want to recognize some of our Astronaut Memorial Foundation family members who have a special place in our hearts. Barbara Lawrence, sister of Robert Lawrence. And would all of Robert Lawrence's extended family please rise and be recognized? And we have Cheryl Chafee, daughter of the Apollo 1 astronaut Roger Chafee. And Kathy Scobie Fulgham, daughter of Challenger Commander Dick Scobie. So thank you all for joining us today. So I'm just going to make a few very brief remarks before we start the program. We are here to remember and honor Major Robert Lawrence, Jr., United States Air Force, for his service to our country and his contributions to aviation and space exploration. We have many wonderful speakers here today, which will be introduced later, so I'm going to keep my comments short, but it's very important for me to share with you the mission of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. It reads, "We honor and memorialize those astronauts who have sacrificed their lives for the nation and for the space program by sponsoring the National Space Memorial Mirror and by implementing innovative technology education programs. So, we honor our astronaut members by using their life's inspiration and example to better prepare for the future. Their lives tell us stories. And our memorial members are role models, and we ensure that they will not be forgotten. So today we're telling the story of Robert H. Lawrence, Jr. We admire him, and we admire his choices in life and the courage that he had to seek out those choices. And I'm sure he was inspired by President John Kennedy in 1962 when he used these words, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." In Robert Lawrence's life, example has and will continue to inspire and encourage young people, young and old, to reach further dreams.
I want to tell you a story.
This is a story about a man.
A great man.
He was a son.
He was a brother.
He was a husband.
A father.
He devoted his life
And he worked hard to make a difference.
For you,
For me.
For us.
when Robert Lawrence came in to the Air Force, when he chose to get into the Air Force ROTC, the U.S. was in turmoil in those days. We were fighting each other in the streets. The civil rights era was at its height. Vietnam was raging. It was not a very popular thing for a young African American to say, okay, I'm going to accept my commission and go fight for this country.
For Robert Lawrence to succeed, he had to be better than the best. And he was.
Well, the fact that Major Lawrence, as an Air Force pilot, had a PhD meant that he was already a cut above. To be accepted into the MOLE program at that time was also a great accomplishment. The MOLE program was a highly selective, highly classified program, and only very few hand-picked people got in.
If you look back, he was considered to be one of the best jet pilots that they had.
We know that he would have flown Shuttle. He would have had a lengthy career and would have had multiple missions had it not been for that tragic accident.
I was the beneficiary of the technique that Robert Lawrence helped to develop in the F-104 when he was a test pilot at Edwards, and it was called the final flare maneuver. And it's the way that we landed every single space shuttle in the 135 flights that we flew. It was really hard to learn. And it, as a matter of fact, because his student didn't appropriately execute it that day, he lost his life.
A great American, great pilot, would have been a great astronaut. We lost him way too soon.
Being an Omega is something very special, and I think Robert Lawrence probably knew it very well, and probably is what caused him to become an Omega. We have something that's called our cardinal principles, and we look at scholarship, perseverance, manhood, and uplift. Robert Lawrence, his life was one of perseverance.
Everybody who was worthy to be the first will remind you that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you're not the last, that yours was only the beginning of the legacy.
Bob Lawrence can now look down upon us, and he can see any number of African Americans, women, and other people of color who have followed him into the astronaut office where he blazed the trail.
We consider Major Lawrence as a pioneer, as one who went in to the military and continued his career fighting for his country, training and learning and being a test pilot, and providing the data and the resources to help to invent the space shuttle. And most certainly, he was a patriot because he died. He died serving our country.
We still live in the greatest country in the world.
We are taught all the time that our purpose in life is to serve other people. We have a saying, friendship is essential to the soul. That says it's not about me. It's about the people around me. It's about taking in other people and bringing them into our circle of brothers and sisters. Because friendship is essential to who we are. That's what makes us so different from other people around the world.
Major Robert Lawrence was a man
who loved God.
A man who believed in his country.
A man who had hope for the future.
then,
Now,
And for tomorrow.
He was the first.
he won't be the last.
Special thanks to the Omega Psi Phi fraternity for their assistance in that video, and Benjamin Crump. It's beautifully done, apt for this great American hero. I'd like to introduce Robert Cabana. Robert Cabana is the director of the Kennedy Space Center. He had the unenviable task of successfully flying out the shuttle until its last mission, and he's leading our way to a new generation of space flight. He's a visionary, he's a great leader, Marine. Bob Cabana flew space shuttle, former shuttle pilot, and we're very, very fortunate to have him here today. Bob?
Thank you, Thad. Boy, what a great video that was. Good morning, and thank you so much for coming out today to honor Major Robert Lawrence. And welcome to the Kennedy Space Center, America's, let's make that the world's preeminent multi-user spaceport. This is a really exciting year coming up for NASA and KSC. Hopefully we'll get a couple test flights off this year on both Boeing and SpaceX. Boeing with the Starliner on an Atlas V, and SpaceX with the Crew Dragon on a Falcon 9, testing their vehicles to send crews to the International Space Station. And this year we're going to have all the infrastructure in place. We'll be ready to start processing, getting ready for launch, the Space Launch System and the Orion capsule that's going to take us back to the moon and onto Mars one day, and that'll all happen, that test flight, hopefully in late 2019. So a very exciting time. Major Lawrence truly was a hero. I mean, he was first. He set the stage for what was to come, and we'll hear more about the mole astronauts in Major Lawrence. But what a great example. 25 years ago today, in fact, I was on orbit with America's first African-American astronaut to fly in space, Guy Bluford, and it was the last classified mission for the shuttle STS-53. We came home yesterday, but what a pleasure it was to fly with Guy. And I know there are many folks that Major Lawrence, Guy Bluford, guys like Charlie Bolden, you know, they were examples for those that followed. You know, when people ask me, what was the major contribution of the space shuttle to America's space program? And it accomplished so many things in its 30-year history. But I tell them, it brought diversity to America's space program. If you look at that first group of shuttle astronauts in 1978, there were black, white, Hispanic, Asian, men, women. It was a truly diverse astronaut program. It was no longer just white military test pilots with a few white scientists thrown in at the end. It set the stage for everybody to be able to fly in space. And that's what it's all about. It's being able to explore beyond our boundaries, to work together as a diverse team to come to the best answer. And Major Lawrence, you know, he took that first step. Had he not been lost 50 years ago, he would have ended up as one of the mole astronauts that came to NASA and became a NASA astronaut. And like Bob Crippen, he would have been flying on the space shuttle also. And I feel, I'm disappointed I never got the chance to know him, but having read about him, he certainly was a fine man. It's my pleasure now to introduce who I think is truly one of the finest gentlemen I've ever known. He's been introduced as the Honorable Mr. Bolden, Major General Bolden, but I'd like to just call him my friend Charlie. Charlie was the 12th Administrator of NASA. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1968, a distinguished test pilot, a combat veteran in Vietnam with over 100 missions. He was selected for the astronaut program in 1980 and got to pilot and command a total of 4 space shuttle missions altogether. And I can't think of a finer individual to be able to introduce and recognize today. Our former NASA administrator, Major General, and my good friend, Charlie Bolden.
Thank you very much, Bob, for your very kind remarks. And for the brothers in the house here, particularly those in Gamma Nu, I hope you noticed that prospective brother Cabana is wearing his purple tie. If you did not notice that, I don't know whether he's campaigning or not, but check him out. You know, Bob, I do want to thank you very much for hosting this for the Kennedy Space Center and the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. Another person I want to thank is Barbara, big sister Barbara, who actually for your personal dedication and sacrifice in helping to establish and cement Bob's memory and legacy. Along with Bob's late wife, Barbara, the two of you sacrificed through the early years of Bob's time in the Air Force, and I believe it was the two of you that provided the wind under his wings when there were many times that he may have felt pretty much alone. So thank you very much for being here and participating in this program. We owe you and formerly Barbara an extreme debt of gratitude for never giving up on the quest to gain the well-deserved recognition of Major Robert Lawrence Jr., and America's first black astronaut. When we think of Bob Lawrence, man of Omega, who lived his life following the cardinal principles of our beloved fraternity, manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. His leadership was recognized early in his days in the Air Force ROTC program at Bradley University, where he was selected cadet commander. Now, I know not a lot of you in here don't recognize the significance of that, but you got to remember, this was 1955, 1956, and Peoria, Illinois was not exactly the far north, and yet Bob Lawrence, in this pre-civil rights era, was selected to be the cadet commander. So that spoke unbelievable words about his leadership ability. He was undeterred by segregation and discrimination that he would find at every turn. He went on to become an Air Force pilot at the age of 21, a test pilot, an Air Force manned orbiting laboratory or MOLE astronaut, and you'll probably hear more about that later, at the age of 32. And when I talk about diversity and discrimination, I could not help but notice, General Abe, the picture of you and Don Peterson and Robert, and I forgot who your fourth member of the class was, but Don Peterson loves to tell stories about traveling through the South with Bob Lawrence and being asked are you all from the CIA or the FBI? Because people were not accustomed to seeing a white and a black together in those days. That's what it was like. On the way to becoming a test pilot and astronaut, Bob had earned a PhD in physical chemistry from the Ohio State University. That in itself was exceptional. That in itself was exceptional. I could be wrong, but until Guy Bluford came into the astronaut office, I don't think we had another pilot who had a PhD. So those are rare beings. Most of us are just, we like to smell fuel and go fast. At the time of his death in an F-104 space training flight, he was involved in the development of the final maneuver that would become a critical part of space shuttle landing techniques called the flare. Had he lived to see the end of the mole program, he would have, without any doubt in my mind, become a NASA astronaut and been a candidate to travel to space in the space shuttle program, as did several of his fellow mole crew members. On this day, when we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the ultimate sacrifice of Major Robert H. Lawrence, Jr. to this country, it's important to remember his legacy, that he was, as you saw in the tribute film to him just a little while ago, he was the first, but he was not the last. He is one of the giants on whose shoulders I stand. He established the foundation on which Guy Bluford, Fred Gregory, the late Dr. Ron McNair, Dr. Mae Jemison, several others of us in this room, Eileen Collins, he is the foundation on whom we stand. He was the first, but definitely not the last. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our 40th Grand Basileus, Brother Antonio Knox. And Brother Knox has a long bio. And I'm not going to read that whole bio to you, but there are some highlights that I want to give you because I think they speak to the man. He is the Deputy Administrator of the North Carolina Credit Union Division today. He's a graduate of North Carolina State University, where he attended the UNC School of Banking and is a certified state credit union supervisor. His office today is responsible for regulating the industry that has over 2 million members and $30 billion in assets in North Carolina. Prior to becoming a regulator, he was the Vice President and Regional Manager at North Carolina Federal S&L, an AVP, an Assistant Vice President at Branch Banking and Trust Company. He has been the financial industry for 35 years. Brother Knox has been a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity for 39 years. He's a charter member of the Kappa Lambda chapter at North Carolina State University, initiated in spring of '78. Brother Knox is known as a community champion. He has coached youth sports for 30 years, served on the board of directors of many organizations and task forces for the city of Raleigh and North Carolina State University. He served as the chairman of the Chancellor's Advisory Committee at NC State for several years. His passion is working with youth and serving as a volunteer at the Garner Road YMCA, where he has been the chairman of the board for many years and fought to keep it as a heritage YMCA. The youth sports he has coached, in youth sports, he has coached a number of championship teams, but he is most proud of the chance he had to coach his son, Tony Jr., and his teammates to several national finishes in AAU basketball. There have been many awards presented to Brother Knox. He was recently awarded Spectacular Magazine's Community Service Man of the Year and has been given the key to several cities. He's a member of St. Matthew's AME, where he has been a trustee and served as in the George A. Parker Men's Club and is now a member of the Stewardship Board. Brother Knox, I gotta tell you this part, or I'd be in trouble. Brother Knox is married to Angela Knox and has 2 children, Antoinette Knox Haygood, and her husband Brian, and Antonio Knox Jr. In September 2014, his first grandchild, Autumn, and his second grandchild, Braylon, who was born in August 2016. Both have stolen his heart. So I'm very proud to present to you at this time the 40th Grand Basileus of my fraternity, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, Brother Antonio Knox.
Thank you. Giving honor to God and my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, to the Lawrence family, and friends, Omega men, and all invited guests. It's been a long time coming, but those who believe in the one who orders our steps knew that this day would come. And though we didn't know here, he knew that this recognition would come, and in what time could be better than what's going on now. As Brother Bolden said, we stand on the shoulders of many, and I stand here on the shoulders of all the former Grand Bachelors before me that have been introduced. In our fraternity, we say that we are one, and the grand officers that are here, and the brothers from the chapters that are here in Florida, that are here to represent Omega Psi Phi. It's an honor and it's a privilege for us to have this opportunity to participate. Thanks to the family. Thank you, Brother Hill, and thank you, NASA, for all giving us this chance to be a part of this. While the documentary has said much of what I had anticipated saying, and Brother Bolden said the rest, but because of the man that Brother Lawrence was, that we could talk from now on and still not tell it all. You know, the fact that he was a scholar, he continues today to inspire others in our STEM program. Lee Willis leads over at NASA as we have a STEM program that's been recognized by a number of universities. And his university, Ohio State, recognized our STEM program and sponsored the program this year and invited them back to Ohio State to sponsor. So even though he's not here physically, he continues to inspire our fourth cardinal principle of uplift. When I look over and I see the young men, it lets me know that he's continuing to inspire others to live their dream. When I see Mr. Scott and when I see the other astronauts that are here, it lets me know that he's continuing to inspire, and they had those shoulders to stand on. And as men of Omega, it's our obligation. It's our obligation to make life better for others. And what better way to do that than to be an inspiration, to allow our young people to live out their dream. We're fortunate. We're fortunate as Brother Lawrence came, and Frederick Gregory, and Ron McNair, and Brother Bolden and others, to continue his legacy, to continue to inspire our young people. And as the world turns, change is created every day. And because of the work that he did, because of the risk that he took, because of the fact that he was willing to risk his life to go out and make a difference for others, people are learning and having that opportunity today. I think his legacy is one that every man will envy. Every man would love to be able to say that even while I'm not there, I'm inspiring others and I'm making a difference and creating positive change. So I know there's much to do today, so I won't belabor this, even though I enjoyed learning and I could continue to talk about it because it was that much to know. And thank you to the family. Thank you for sharing him, and thank you for allowing him to do the things that he did and supporting him. Because we know that during the times that he had those accomplishments, there was obstacles larger than some people could handle. But through his cardinal principles and learning that Omega life, and through his family support, he was able to achieve and still continues to inspire. So, Tony, I thank you for allowing us to participate. These things don't happen without there being some support. And if you're the person that I should present this to, if you would come forward, I would like to make a presentation. And brothers, would you please stand? On behalf of the men of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, it's indeed an honor for us to be able to participate with the sponsorship for this memorial service. We couldn't be happier, and we're honored to be able to do as we serve and continue to recognize our brother, Major Robert Lawrence Jr. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and that was a little bit unexpected, and I tell you, these Omega Sci-Fi guys are amazing. They're amazing, I'll tell you. This will be not the, yes. And I love that theme of our video, this will not be the last. This will not be the last. You guys represent the future. Thank you. I'd like to introduce you to another great individual that you've heard. Was listening to him, Winston Scott. We know that Robert Lawrence enjoyed jazz. His sister Barbara let us know that. And so Winston's band here has put together some music in honor of him. And Winston, is he here? Right, good, right there, good, okay, good, I wanted to be sure. Winston, former shuttle astronaut, naval aviator. Winston flew 2 space shuttle missions. He did a EVL, extra spacewalk, as laymen know. He's been a leader in this community. He led the State of Florida Space Initiative, Space Florida, did a wonderful job there. He's head of aerospace engineering for a great university, Florida Institute of Technology, who has classes here that we love, FIT, one of the great technical schools of our country. And he's a good musician, too. So, Winston, please come forward.
Thank you. As the band comes forward, just give me one moment to say something. First of all, it's an honor to be here. And we play music all the time, but this is a very, very special occasion for me. This is December 8th. December 5th, 3 days ago, was the 20th anniversary of when we landed from 16 days in orbit aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. And this is a wonderful, life-changing event for me, but it would not have happened without trailblazers like Major Robert Lawrence. So it is indeed an honor to dedicate this number to the legacy of Major Robert Lawrence.
And while they're setting up, I do want to introduce a few local elected officials and state officials. State Representative Randy Fein is here with us. I saw Matt Susan, school board member who's worked so hard and helped with some of the high school students we have here. And a very special person who's really helped AMF a lot, Lisa Cullen, our tax collector. You know, this all began with the vision of creating a specialty license tag, which has funded all this and made this all possible. And Lisa's the one who sells that to the public. So those of you who are Florida residents, if you haven't bought your Challenger Columbia license tag, contact your local tax collector. I'll turn to you, Winston, go.
Take a trip on a rocket ship. We'll have a pleasant afternoon. Kiss the world goodbye, and away we'll fly. Destination moon. Travel fast as light till we out of sight. It'll be a spoiled balloon. What a thrill you get riding on a jet. Destination moon. And we'll go up, 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 straight to the world with two. Out in the starry blue, there be never the time with you. So away we'll steer on a spacemobile. We'll have a perfect afternoon. Let your cares below, put the brakes, let's go. Destination moon. Pump the brakes, let's go. Destination moon. Destination moon. Destination moon.
I guess I'm going to have to do it. And that's what jazz is all about. It's ad-libbing. I will just simply introduce our next speaker, the distinguished... Oh, you're going to do it? Well, come on. If you don't, I'll step in and take over.
I was enjoying the music so much, I wanted the next piece. I wanted y'all to keep going. I'd like to also introduce the president of FIT, Winston's employer. Dr. Dwayne McKay is here with us today. At least I saw him earlier. Yeah. Bob, I think we should have the first jazz performance in space and send Winston back up there. That's, yeah. We are very honored to have us with us, an individual who probably knew Robert Lawrence more than anyone. It's his sister, Barbara Lawrence, who's an amazing individual in and of herself. She's a native of Chicago. She has started her professional career as a social worker in Chicago. She's taught social studies in Chicago secondary schools, moved to New York City to work for a nonprofit agency specializing in college counseling and admissions for minority students. She was a college professor. She established and she served on many boards. One most notably, she was a senior staff member on 2 New York City Charter Revision Commissions in the city of New York. She taught at university in New York City, teaching undergraduate courses in political science, went on to become director of admissions and deputy to the school where she taught. She served honorably as a member of the trustees of the Culinary Institute of America and has been a remarkable member of the Astronaut Memorial Foundation as a board member and a member of our trustees. She is a doer, a giver, a supporter. She has served as a leader and has always been there for us. Barbara, please give her a rounding applause and welcome to her here.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to, welcome you all here, and I want to especially thank THAD, the AMF, Omega Sci-Fi, for sponsoring this momentous occasion. I am truly honored by your efforts, and I appreciate all that you have done. I'm going to talk a little bit about my life with my brother. This short period of time that I shared with him exclusively before he was married, before he became a full-time member of the military, were the special years that I think were formative for him. I'm the older of 2 children, and I'm older by 18 months, so you can all figure out how old I am, okay? As if the gray hair alone wasn't a tip. For the first, I would say, 12 years of our lives, it was as if we were twins. We were always together. We did everything together. We played baseball together. Has anybody here ever heard of Piggy Move Up? Never heard of it, huh? Well, this is the baseball game you played if you had 3, at least 3, as many as 5 or more players. You needed a hitter, a pitcher, and a fielder. The more players you had, you could add a catcher, whatever. And as the hitter hit the ball, each person moved to the next position. Piggy, move up. So everybody got a chance to play. I was the only girl on the team because I was always with my brother, and I did what he did. It wasn't easy, I'm going to tell you. Even then, it wasn't easy being the only girl. But it was supportive of what my brother did, so I did it. Now, there are 3 pillars in our lives that I would like to stress. One was our family. You've heard talk about me, but the key persons were our parents. The second pillar was our schools. And the third pillar was our church. I'll talk about each of these separately. On the evening of December 7th, 1941, my parents and my brother and I were listening to the radio, and we heard the monumental broadcast and announcement by President Franklin Roosevelt that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor and that that day would live as a day of infamy. Our folks were visibly upset, but we were kids. We didn't quite understand why, but we came to understand why. My father was drafted in the United States Army, as were 2 of his 3 brothers, all of whom had active duty service. My father was in the European theater, my uncles were in the Pacific theater. But it meant that they had to leave the home. That left my mother with 2 children to take care of. She did not work at the time, but she got a job. An interesting experiment in integration with the Department of the Army. She and 7 other black women were hired to work at the quartermaster depot at the 5th Army headquarters in Chicago. They were a pioneering group, and it wasn't easy for them, but they persevered, and they made indelible impressions, and my mother went on to a 40-year career in government service, ending up at the Department of Justice, Immigration, and Naturalization Service, where she served with great distinction, such that when she retired, they asked her to come back and help administer the change in the immigration law. She said, no, 40 years is enough. But she had to go to work, so we needed somebody to take care of us while she was away. My maternal grandmother stepped into those shoes, and my paternal grandfather also became a very supportive and crucial influence in our lives. While we lived at home, we spent at least 2 evenings a week having dinner at Papa's house. He was our first intellectual experience. He had an extensive library, including a set of encyclopedias. And so after dinner, we would always read. He would read to us either books he chose, books we chose. If we had a question about something, he would say, well, let's look it up. And to the encyclopedias we would go. He taught us how to play games. For example, one of the things we learned was pickup sticks. How many people here have played pickup sticks? Yeah, it's a great way to develop hand-eye coordination. Here, little hands trying to balance and pick up without moving these sticks. He taught us how to play Chinese checkers and then checkers. The point I'm making here is that we were always learning something. And the emphasis was on learning something and accomplishing something, developing a skill. Later on, when the war ended, my dad came home. He had been severely affected by the war, and he and my mother ultimately separated. But we were very fortunate in having a new person appear in our lives as a father figure. It was my stepfather, Charles Duncan. And he continued the same tradition of teaching us things, learning things. They taught also not only things, but principles and precepts. They were very much into character building. How many times have we all heard, your word is your bond? You do what you say you're going to do. You have an obligation also to do things that reflect well not only on yourself, but on your family, on your community, and for us, on black people. We were called Negroes at the time. But our dad, as we called Charles Duncan, taught us how to play chess. And whatever happened with one happened with both. If Bob did something, I did it. If I did something, he did it. So we were an equal opportunity family. My mother said, if you eat, you need to know how to cook. So he became a great cake baker. He watched her, he listened, he paid attention to what she said, and she had her favorite set of wooden bowls that she had gotten from her own mother. He would make the cake in the wooden bowls, test the temperature in the oven, and bake the cake. It was always good. She said, you wear shirts, you need to know how to iron them. Well, guess what he did? He got the collar, he got the cuffs, and then he just pressed the front of the shirt. Because he always had to wear a jacket. So he said, nobody will see the rest of it. My mother said, no, no, no. You do the job, you do the whole job. You don't half-step. Okay, all right. The other thing we learned to do, my dad taught us chess, and they taught us bridge. And we learned to play bridge. Bob became very good at both chess and bridge, and he played them both for the rest of his life. He was very good at both. Me, not so much, but I could stumble along. What the principle of the bridge game was to learn how to count, to learn how to pay attention. You could then tell who played what cards were outstanding, which hand was likely to hold the remaining cards, and so you were able to assess your chance of success and the outcome of the game. It was all about learning. The same thing was true with chess, as you all know. It's a game that requires a great deal of thought and skill. But we made the investment because that's what we were taught to do. Learn how to do things. Think about what you do. Stick with it. Persevere. These are lessons you learn from childhood. I want to move on to the school part. Well, before I depart. My mother wanted us to learn to play a musical instrument. So we had a piano. She had bought a piano during the war. She had arranged for us to take music lessons at one of the downtown conservatories. So we would troop off once a week to lesson, but we also, it was expected, we would practice every day, at least an hour a day. So when we came home from school, we had a routine, but practice for 1 hour was part of that routine. I did it diligently, but not enthusiastically. Bob did it diligently and enthusiastically, such that one day he's on his way to a music lesson. Some of you may have heard this story before. He's on his way to a music lesson, and he's about to be late, and he dashes for, in those days it was a trolley, to go downtown to take his lesson. And he gets hit by a car as he's crossing the street. He picks himself up, dusts himself off, and keeps running for the trolley, and the man who hit him stopped. He said, "Stop, stop, little boy, stop. Are you hurt?" He said, "No, I'm not hurt." He said, "Do you want me to take you to the doctor?" He said, "No, I have to go to my music lesson. If I miss my lesson, my mother will kill me." So off he went. The man stayed at our house. He waited for one of our parents to come home because he wanted to be sure that Bob had not been hurt. Now, this is a responsible person. My mother got home first, and he explained to her what happened. By then, Bob got back from music lesson. She said, "Well, are you all right, Bob?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And she said, "Well, thank you, sir, for being so attentive, but he's all right." He said, "That's remarkable. His main concern was to go to his class so that you would not be disappointed." And she said, "Well, that's the kind of boy he is, very responsible." The man said, "You have a remarkable child." And that was sort of the tenor of his life. He was a remarkable child. He learned to play the piano, and he was very, very good at it. He learned, it wasn't just notes. And I had hoped that we might have heard one of the recital pieces that he played. It was interesting because it was Chopin's military, March Militaire, as it's called. And he loved it, and he played it throughout his piano playing days. When he went to Europe, he didn't have a piano to play, so he stopped. And I think while he was in the Air Force, he didn't have a piano, so he didn't play anymore. one of my regrets is that his son Tracy never heard him play the piano, but I did, and he was very good. In any case, again, playing the piano taught discipline. Practice makes perfect. You don't get something for nothing. You make an investment. Moving on to school, we were fortunate in that we grew up in Chicago. During the war, it was amazing that the city, we experienced rationing, we experienced blackouts, we had victory gardens, because everybody was committed to the war effort and doing what you needed to do to help America win the war. We grew up with an emphasis on patriotism and service. We were proud of our father and his brothers for their military service. And believe it or not, in schools, I'm somewhat surprised at the direction things have taken, but we stood up with saluting the flag and singing the national anthem every day. Patriotism was something that was built in us, and we appreciated, even though the society was not perfect, we appreciated the opportunities that we had. We got wonderful public educations. And in fact, one of the few sources of discontent between my sister-in-law and my brother when the time came to put their child in school was she wanted a private school and he wanted public. He said, I got a great education in public schools. She said, but they're not the same. They're not like they used to be when you went. And so we have to send him to a private school. Anyway, my point was, we got great public educations. We went to schools that were racially mixed, so we learned how to get along with everybody, and everybody got along with everybody. The teachers, with no exception, were always white. That did not matter because they were dedicated, they loved what they did, they were competent at it, and they encouraged us. They not only taught us, but they appreciated us as people. So we grew up in that environment, moving through the world that was a real world, mixed with different people of all kinds. My brother's best friend in elementary school was Ping Tom. If you're from Chicago, you know the Ping Tom name because he became the informal mayor of Chinatown. He went on to Harvard Law School, smart and rich, very rich. Walter Moy was another of our friends. The day my brother was killed and it was on the news, the first person to bound into our house was Walter Moy. So these were lasting relationships. They were real relationships, and they taught us valuable lessons about life that we were each able to use as we moved through our lives. Bob learned things in secondary school that stood him well in good stead for the rest of his academic career. When we went to high school, you chose a curriculum. Ours was, at our parents' insistence, the college preparatory curriculum, which meant that you started with a foreign language and different sciences and so forth. Bob chose German. German? We had German friends, but he chose German as his language. I chose French. He said, well, German is the language of the sciences. Okay. Now, maybe he was interested in science because as he was growing up, he got erector sets and chemistry sets, and my stepfather and Bob would perform little experiments on the chemistry sets, and they got progressively more sophisticated as he got older. Anyway, he studied German, and his chemistry teacher was one of his most important influences, Mr. Sullivan. He loved Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan loved him and spent time with him. I mean, nobody was clock watching in those days. Teachers spent time after school with the students that they wanted to encourage and support. He went on to Bradley and majored in chemistry. And chemistry majors at Bradley had to take German for 4 years. So he developed a facility for the language, which was partly responsible for the reason he was sent as part of that initial group to retrain the German Air Force. Now, one of the stories that he told me, this is no secondhand story, there had been a number of fatal accidents at Furstenfeldbruck Air Force Base, Firsty as it was called. And being analytical, he said, why is this happening? The best pilots are being sent here to train these young men, and we know they're qualified, so why is it happening? And he thought, and he said, I know why. Because we're teaching them in English, and they don't have time at the speed at which they are traveling to translate the commands from English to German and then execute. They need to be taught in their native language. A recommendation he made to the base commander, who said, well, you know what that means? That means that all of our instructors will have to be bilingual. And my brother said, or he reported to me, he said, yeah. And so the language of instruction was changed, for which he received recommendation by the German government. It was an important innovation. And this, just like he had been well taught, that was one of his motivations, to teach well. He came home from Germany, and the Germans, as we all know, reconstructed their Air Force, and they're a military might today. He came home to go to Ohio State University, where he studied for and received a PhD in physical chemistry. And as Dr. White will tell you, that's not just chemistry. That's something special in chemistry, a very arduous part of the discipline. But he did get a PhD in physical chemistry, and when he graduated, and there's a photograph of him with the president of Ohio State, who usually always confers the PhD. When you get hooded, that's a special thing. My mother said to him, well, what is your favorite thing, the Air Force or chemistry? And he said, I'm the luckiest man in the world because I get to do the two things I love most. Chemistry and flying. The two things I love. He didn't say my wife, my son, my mother, my sister. The two things I love most, chemistry and flying. That gives you kind of a sense of his patriotism. He loved his country. He loved the opportunity to serve it. And he understood something, that whatever he did was important to those who came after, because you, as we were taught, you lead by example. Not only is your word your bond, but what you do speaks volumes for who you are. It's not what you say, it's what you do. I am truly proud to have been his sister. When he graduated from college and went into the military, our paths diverged. He had his life to live, and I led mine. And except for trips when he came home on vacations and visits, I didn't get to spend much time with him. But what I have are the memories of our childhood, the memories of our growing up, and the knowledge of the kind of person he was, the reason he led his life the way he did, and what he was able to accomplish. He never was interested in being the first of anything. He was only being interested in being given an opportunity to do what he could do. And the Air Force gave him that opportunity. I don't want to belabor that point, but he really did love his time in the military. The third thing, the third force, was our church. We grew up as Christian Scientists, and some of you may have ideas about what that means, but I can tell you it doesn't mean quite what the public perception of it is. Oh, you're those people who don't go to doctors. Listen, nobody keeps the medical profession in business any more than me. So that's not true. But there's a habit of mind that because it's a kind of intellectual religion, we were always taught to question. One of the big questions we used to ask our Sunday school teachers, which drove them absolutely mad, I'm sure, is, well, if everything is good that was created, where did evil come from? It's not as if it doesn't exist. So how do you reconcile your notion of good with the appearance and reality of evil? We talk through, in Christian Science, you go to Sunday school till you're 20. Okay? Sunday school, they got you. When they let you go at 20, you have been socialized into some of the values of the church. But also, we learned lots of things about the real world. The Christian Science Monitor, which some of you may know, is a nationally known and highly regarded newspaper. It is separate from the church. It's published by the Christian Science Publishing Society, but it is not an organ of the church. There's no editorial involvement. Every Sunday school was responsible for having a Monitor Youth Forum. That meant the kids in the Sunday school, up to 20, not such kids, could participate in the youth forum, and it was devoted to the study of current affairs. So our church was a, quote, colored church in the city of Chicago. It was the only one. All the other churches were white. But that didn't matter, because when we had the Monitor Youth Forum meetings, we met with kids from other churches. And we would also have contests on the knowledge of current affairs, because that's what we did. We discussed current events as reported in the newspaper, and then we'd meet and discuss. It was a wonderful opportunity, and here we are. The kids would come to our church, we would go to their churches. So again, it was an opportunity to interact with different people from all over the city, representing different ethnicities and cultures, and we all got along, and we learned things from each other. So these were the pillars that helped shape our lives: knowing others, working with others, getting along with others. I think the person that you see up here reflected well all those values and principles. I'm only sorry that he didn't have an opportunity to work a little bit longer, but I think his job was well done. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. That was absolutely one of the best bio presentations, inspirational talks I've ever heard. What a remarkable woman, what a remarkable man. Two incredible Americans. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Herman White, Jr., senior scientist. He is going to have a presentation for us. Looking forward to it. Dr. White, are you... Please come forward.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I am going to probably say some things that have already been said before, but I've been told that repetition is just fine when you're talking about something that's great as the person that we're talking about this morning. This is a slide presentation that's part of what we actually did at the university, Bradley University in Peoria. I was the memorial lecturer for that event. This is the 50th anniversary of Major Lawrence's passing. So what you see here is basically some ideas that I had. This is a different perspective. The perspective is not just in terms of what a person has done, but the preparation that was responsible for getting him to the point where they made the call to say, Major Lawrence, come walk in space with us. And that requires a great deal of effort, a great deal of work, sometimes perseverance, and a great deal of vision with regard to young people. When I was talking to the students at Bradley University, it was basically a speech to those students, because you do not know what talents you're going to need when it's time for you to actually do the work. Learning German was not necessarily an absolute thing that was required, but it was something that actually changed the dynamics of how you actually teach German flyers to fly. In the next slide, basically you will see essentially all of these topics. This is the life of Major Lawrence, and I have some photographs in here that have some younger photographs of individuals who are in this room, so forgive me before I even start. I know that you're individuals who walk in space, so I have to be really special and careful about that. Well, let me just get my talk up here. I'm sorry about that part. Okay, here we go. So Major Lawrence, and this is a little bit more of a history perspective. As you can see, a very dynamic man, and in the next slide you see essentially the historical summary. Now this is the same sort of information that you have actually already heard about. He was born October 2nd on the south side of Chicago, graduated from high school, and then elected as the cadet commander of the Air Force ROTC in 1955, graduated Bradley University with a degree in chemistry, and then entered flight and active duty in West Germany. He returned to the United States and started graduate school at the Ohio State University in physical chemistry and got a PhD in physical chemistry. Not to demean anybody's training, but sometimes I have been asked about people who are interested in going into the astronaut corps and what kind of training you need to be able to do that. And I always go back to the time of thinking about Major Lawrence to say, you might want to think of getting a PhD. And they said, well, why do I need that? I said, because Robert Lawrence got one. It's pretty simple. And in fact, if you look at the next slide, well, the next slide where you see essentially his flight. I'm going to go through these a little fast because each one of these I want to highlight, but I don't want to belabor this too long. But when you actually look at the graduate program and the graduate studies that he actually did, most of the training that was actually done in the next slide, you will see, I think Barbara mentioned the ceremony for awarding the PhD, and that's the next slide after this, that one. As you can see, he's getting his PhD in physical chemistry. He was the first astronaut trained in chemistry. Now, many of the other astronauts, and I have the list of the first 17, I'm going to ask your forgiveness again, and I looked at the backgrounds of all individuals who actually had been chosen in that first 17 groups of people. Exceptional, exceptional individuals. Many from our national academies, many who are trained in aeronautical engineering, trained in mechanical engineering. There were 2 physicists, I have to point that out, and there were also individuals who were in various areas of science. But there was one undergraduate in chemistry and one PhD in chemistry, and that was Robert Lawrence. And you might ask, if I studied chemistry, would I think about actually flying in space? Well, perhaps not. In the early days of the Apollo program, many of us in the academic community would ask the questions about whether, in fact, you had to have a particular background to go to the moon. And one of the things that came up was that you might want to be a geologist. After all, you're looking at an area that no one had explored before. But in essence, my attitude on it was that you had to be an explorer. The next slide shows you some of the news reports that identified, and as Barbara has said, we were called Negroes then, the first Negro astronaut. And when you think about that, the work that actually is done by individuals to train themselves academically and otherwise is extremely important. But this university was very, very excited about the fact that one of their alumni had actually been chosen to be trained in the military astronaut corps. Bradley University, in the next slide, is interesting in the sense that I look at that university somewhat like the university the town that I grew up in, and the institute that, in fact, was the basis of many of my academic experiences. Lydia Bradley, who's founded the university motivated to provide practical knowledge in the arts and sciences, was not unlike the university in Tuskegee, Alabama. And Tuskegee also was a place that provided a knowledge and some practical experience for independent living by people who did not have access to academic training. But it was also the home of the Tuskegee Airmen and the Army Air Corps during World War II. And personally, I would like to believe that in 1985, when Robert Lawrence was born and going to college in the mid-1950s and all the accomplishments that he had, he might very well have thought about the Tuskegee Airmen during that time. I certainly know that I did, and everyone in my community did. The work that those individuals did was absolutely amazing. But remember in the next slide this photograph of the people who were called Tuskegee Airmen. I basically call them pioneers. These were individuals who actually took it upon themselves to go out and do something that, number one, everyone said you can't do, you shouldn't be able to do, we're not going to let you do. But they did it anyway. This is, in fact, the characteristics of a pioneer. When Robert Lawrence was actually chosen for the Manned Orbital Laboratory, and this in the next slide you'll see essentially sort of an artistic picture of it, originally referred to as the Manned Orbiting Laboratory. It was part of the manned spaceflight program of the Air Force, replacing the military spaceplane project. And NASA's concepts of the manned space station was used as a reconnaissance purposes. You can see essentially the place where the individuals would be in that system, as well as I think Gemini 3. I think it's a Gemini 3 capsule in terms of the transport system to get back and forth. The next slide is more of a, the pictures that you saw up there earlier, and Barbara mentioned this to say, how did we get these guys to smile? But this is a few seconds after that photograph. So here you see, and some of those individuals are here, and I'm very honored to even be in the same room with them, but they look like they're really happy. And that's also a characteristic of pioneers. The next slide shows you essentially the F-104 starfighter that Major Lawrence was a real pioneer in working with and flying. Now, the next slide tells you something about the posthumous recognition that it usually provided to many people who give their lives and who commit to various things in our society, particularly from a point of view of not really knowing what's going to happen in the future. And what you see, of course, are the various types of recognition that many of the folks who we know and many of the pioneers that we have in our country and around the world, for that matter, usually acquire. The naming of lecture halls, the naming of schools, the naming of various lectureships, student scholarships, and so forth. In December 8th, 1997, the family of Lawrence was successful in inscribing and having his name inscribed on the Space Mirror Memorial here at the Kennedy Space Center. And that was a great day, I think, for the whole family and certainly for the memory of Major Lawrence. Let me point out that when we think about recognition, and it's important to know this, the reason that we're here today is because we do not allow those who pioneered and started things to be forgotten. It is important, and it is important from the point of view of looking in the eyes of young people and asking them, what is it that you want to do? Where do you want to go in your life? They can look back on other people's lives and say, I want to follow that path. Well, that path is usually closing. It's usually closed. But that's okay, because the road that they open up in making that path makes it a lot easier, I think, for the young people. And to some extent, the effort that was put in and the success for having Dr. Lawrence, Major Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence recognized here in the memorial wall is one that I think we should be very, very proud of and very, very concerned, happy with. Let me point out in the next couple of slides that he was also recognized as a distinguished alumni in June of 1968 at Bradley University. That's 2 slides from now. And the next slide. And this is something that happens with a lot of universities around the world to recognize the accomplishments of their graduates. The next slide and the next 2 slides, actually, I want to just finish by saying something very. I'm an academic, so I smash atoms for a living. I work at the world's highest energy particle accelerator, so I'm usually in my head more than talking to people. But I'm very, very happy to look at this particular process. What you see here is a list, and with incredible respect, of the 17 individuals who are part of the MOLE program. I consider these individuals to be pioneers as well. The idea of actually being trained and what it meant to be trained and live in space was something entirely different than the kind of pioneering that we saw and thought about in the past. Some of the individuals that you see on this list are here. I identified a number of individuals here, some of whom are in the room, but I identified Commander Truly specifically because Commander Truly is in Group 1 and Major Lawrence is in Group 3. And a number of 7, or slightly more than 7 actually, of the individuals that were part of this list went on to be part of the space transport system, the Space Shuttle program. And I have no doubt in my mind that had Major Lawrence survived, he would have probably been a part of that transition as well. But I note Richard Truly particularly because he was the commander. In the next slide, you'll see a copy of my flight cover of the STS-8, which was the first night launch of the Space Shuttle in 1983. And the next slide will show you, well, the next couple of slides will show you essentially what that group of individuals looked like. It's important to recognize the fact, and it was mentioned earlier, about this particular historic flight in terms of the sociology that's important in our country and the participation that people have. There are people like Guyon Bluford, there are people like Robert Lawrence who are pioneers. They will go the extra distance, they will take that step out where no one has stepped before and actually show the way for us. In the next slide, on that night, I was really honored to have met, he wasn't General Bowden then. This is 1983, the first night launch of the Space Shuttle, and so I had a chance to talk at length with General Bowden, and I was motivated then. I said, well, I think it's time for me to go up too. But there was a difference in terms of that. The shuttle actually was scheduled for 9:30, and it actually went off at 2:30 in the morning. There are some other, in the next slide you will see, there are other African Americans who are part of the space program. This is from a mural at the Lambert International Airport in St. Louis, Missouri. It's much larger than this, but as you can see, there's Major Lawrence there, General Bowden, and a number of other individuals, my friend Ron McNair, who is also a physicist. I want to just mention just briefly in the next slide a incomplete list of African Americans who, and NASA actually puts this slide together, and I got it from their website, of African Americans who are astronauts. These individuals benefit from the fact that Robert Lawrence took that step and said, yes, I will be trained, and I will go, and I will be an astronaut. I am really honored to have known a number of these individuals. And the next slide will show you certainly Mae Jameson when we were in South Africa, motivating, in her case, young women in South Africa to consider technology as a career. This is a worldwide thing. I think our country leads the world in terms of making sure that people understand that there are paths in life, and we actually are pioneers as a country. Let me finish by saying that, as General Bowden said earlier, what was going on inside of the country during the time that he actually passed away. And I want to make just 2 points. On the next slide, you will see essentially a quote that was made by a person at a community college, but read by Jim Lovell, commander of Apollo 13. While many would consider them exclusive, Jackson notes that there are many interesting parallels between the civil rights movement and the space program. And in 1957, while the nation was torn by the integration of the Little Rock schools, the country was also galvanized by the launch of Sputnik. In 1962, while the Freedom Riders were registering votes in South, John Glenn bound us all by orbiting the Earth. And at the end of the 1960s, Americans walked on the moon, while also mounting the loss of Martin Luther King. And throughout the entire civil rights movement, there were African Americans also involved in the space program. I want to just sort of say that when you look at the perspective of people who start out and get their training and do work in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, society, aerospace work, you have to remember that sometimes it's a lonely, lonely effort, because now there are people who are living in space, literally living in space. But what do we see on news programs is usually about some sociological issue that we will not resolve. But the idea that we actually have people from our planet living in space around our planet doesn't make the news anymore. So I implore you, hunt out those particular reports. Be very conscious of the fact that we pioneers will actually do things without having a great deal of recognition, but that we have to remember the Robert Lawrences of the world who actually did that pioneering, and we have to keep their memory very, very fresh in our memory. So the last 2 slides actually are photographs, artistic photographs, and I think they're very great. Let me thank Dr. Barbara Lawrence for suggesting my being here today, and I'm grateful to the Astronaut Memorial Foundation for the opportunity to speak and participate in this ceremony. Thank you very much.
Now, on my program, I have Winston Scott's ensemble to perform again. Good.
As the band comes forward, let me do one more thing real quick. If you go on Google and put any of your names in there, something may come up. Some of you have a little bit, some of you have a lot. But if you Google Marva King, more stuff will come up than you have time to read. More importantly, more stuff will come up than you have time to listen to. We're very, very privileged to have international recording star Marva King.
Such an honor to be here to support Robert Lawrence. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. Fill my life with song, let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true. Western sky. Let me play amongst the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. Hey, fill my life with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, please be true, baby. In other words, I love you. In other words, I love you. Give it up for Winston Scott.
Wow, thank you, Marvel. That's fantastic. Very special. Well, in the pictures that we saw of the members of the Manned Orbiting Lab up on the screen, one of those individuals is here to speak with us, and it's a gentleman whose resume is so long we'd be here the rest of the afternoon, but he truly is an American hero. He served with Robert Lawrence on the Manned Orbiting Lab program. He led the Strategic Defense Initiative under President Reagan for the defense of our national assets and our national safety. He 49 missions in Southeast Asia too. Major General James Abramson, Lieutenant General James Abramson. Make that right.
All of us that are here ought to first think just 1 minute about Bob and the relationship that here we are. There's many, many people, some that I know, some good friends, some absolute strangers, and we're all connected in a way built around what Bob contributed and what he did. And I want to talk about our class, our test pilot class, where all of us came in as strangers. None of us knew the team that was there. None of us knew those who were competing for the Manned Orbiting Laboratory before. And what we did, we all came to Edwards Air Force Base. Now, I'll describe Edwards in one way. There is no place in the continental United States that is further from anywhere. It's in the high desert north of Los Angeles. and it is really an isolated place. The reason that it's there is that there are these big, big dry lakes, and the best one to land an airplane or a space shuttle or other aeronautical vehicles is the dry lake at Edwards. Now, it's dry most of the time. And the reason that it makes a smooth, sandy, hard sand surface is because sometimes in a year it'll get wet, and the wind up there is so profound sometimes that it just serves to finish the surface on the lake. So the X-15 was flown from that area so it could land on the lake. Many other vehicles, amazing vehicles, were flown there. And at Edwards is the Air Force Test Pilot School. And we were all selected, along with another group, to be an amazing class there. We had more advanced degrees than all of the instructors and all of the all of the staff at the place. We produced more general officers with more stars out of that class than ever had been there before. And people talk about what Bob could have done and would have done, but I want to concentrate on what he really did with us and for us as students at the Air Force Test Pilot School. Now, what did we do? There was a tough academic program, and obviously Bob, with bringing in one of 2 PhDs in that class, was a great intellect, a coach for us, and helped us in many ways academically. But the best part of the school was flying every machine, different machine, good and bad, that we ever had a chance to get, wouldn't have had a chance to get our hands on in any other venue. Now, there is, I'll have to say, a Navy test pilot school, and since I'm going to be followed by Bob Crippen, he may want to point out that that's a unique place as well. But that's a little closer to civilization, Bob, and we rarely got out. So we worked incredibly hard. We lived in a little kind of a group of small, old, one-story houses that were where the student body was living. And we were all kind of together, bunched together. There were other houses around where the instructors lived and other people who worked and lived and contributed at Edwards lived. All one story. I'll emphasize that later, come back to the one story. Bob lived around the corner, Bob and Barbara lived just kind of around the corner from me. And he happened to have 2 children, just about the same ages as my 2 children. And they went to school together at a little school on the base because it was an eternal ride to get off the base to go to any school. They played together. We had lots of things that went on, and some fairly unique that you wouldn't have gotten. By the way, the decor and the architecture of the yards and all that was desert basic, which meant that there were a few animal skulls in the front yard here and there. There were cactus, of course, not much green at all. I happen to have in my backyard, because my wife really worked at it, a little bit of grass and a fenced yard. And one of the challenges that Bob's children and my children together, they discovered a huge desert tortoise kind of walking behind one of the houses. It may have been running, but nobody could tell that, of course. And they were able to maneuver this tortoise in a way through my back gate and get him in there. And of course, he found grass. That was really unusual for this desert tortoise. And one of the issues Bob and I had were to explain to our kids that you can't keep this tortoise. You have to return him back to where he really lived and worked. Maybe he had babies or a wife or something somewhere. And so we explained that. Bob was instrumental in persuading my kids, who were particularly stubborn, about the whole process. As we worked, the class worked together, and Bob was, as I mentioned, a leader in our academic efforts, but he was also terrific to fly with. He was this great pilot. We had some airplanes, and in the top picture up there is the nose section of a 104, but that's a one-place 104. We had some two-place 104s. So in our missions, we were either solo in it and maybe flying in formation, one in chase and one doing a series of tests. Or if we had a two-place mission, we were doing some special maneuvers that had been invented, not as student maneuvers, but to train people in some of the new kinds of vehicles that were coming. And these were essentially wingless lifting bodies. And one of the really great maneuvers, a strange one with these two airplanes, was to get at about 12,000 feet, and when you looked down, it looked like you were right over the end of the runway. Then you drop the gear, drop all the drag devices on the machine, put the machine in your minimum throttle setting, and point it straight down, and then practice a landing. And that was part of Bob's contribution to learning a shuttle landing in terms of all of those techniques. So we got to fly a lot together. I remember just about every flight. You know, we were all eager to go, and Bob would come out with me, and we'd go out to the airplane, and Bob would be strolling along very calmly. No one has mentioned that one of his unique abilities was to be calm in every circumstance. Even when his fellow pilot on the mission was going nuts with getting all ready for the mission. And he usually had a quote, too, like, always walk slow, but never turn and look back, because something really bad may be right back there, and you're better off not knowing it. But so he taught us, and he helped us in what perhaps is the one thing that has been inferred and talked to, and Barbara talked a little bit about it, but not directly. Bob's inspiration, and we've all used the word inspiration, but Bob's humanity. Bob was a PhD, a leader in everything he did. He was a team builder. He did all of these things with just being a terrific human being with the characteristics that make people love, respect, admire, and in the end, emulate. Now, some of the things that were emulated were not always good. We had a class that was, in fact, one that had, we carried on a tradition out there. Because Edwards was so isolated, we had parties all the time on Saturday nights, not Sunday night. You had to fly Monday morning. and we'd get together and we'd had all kinds of things. Now, once in a while, we'd want to compete. We had a couple of Navy people in our group. There maybe was just a tad too much alcohol that was passing back and forth. Or if the party went really late. And if it went really late, combined with just a little too much alcohol, there was a tradition. All these were one-story houses. And if we had an instructor, an academic instructor, or anybody else who was really making it tough, we would get ladders from our garages, and late at night we would sneak down the street to their house, place the ladders on different sides of the house, climb up on the roof, and do what was familiarly called the roof stomp. So after everybody's asleep, all of a sudden there's this screaming and yelling on the roof and people stomping their feet and making all this terrific noise. And then the trick was to disappear very, very quickly, get your ladder and run off in different directions so they don't know which students were involved in that particular exercise. I'm not going to say that Bob was a leader in all of that, but he was a participant. Bob's example, of course, was what we all miss so badly, and it was his human example and the kind of a man that he was. And you described the things that often are not fully understood. I mean, what is courage? What is determination? What is the real will of human beings to break through the challenges, the racial challenges that were occurring at the time that Bob came in the Air Force and exceeded in all those ways. That ended on that one day, but it didn't end. It really didn't end. The three of us in that bottom picture, the one on this side was a really amazing leader. We called him our boy colonel. He was our class commander. Don Peterson is on the other side of the real star in that picture. And I'm the one who is so uncomfortable trying to smile there. And of course, you just look there and you look, and Bob is the one with the best, genuine, terrific smile for everybody. And that's the way it worked. Bob smiled, he helped, he was the best of a human being, and his best was better than many of other people's best. And so what he gave us made us all better. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce another one of Robert Lawrence's classmate and fellow astronaut at the Manned Orbiting Lab program, Bob Crippen. Robert Crippen, the first pilot, the first astronaut to fly a space shuttle. He flew 4 missions, was commander of 3 missions. He served here at the Astronaut Memorial as our chairman. He was the head of the Kennedy Space Center. He was the director of the Kennedy Space Center. Real American hero and an amazing astronaut, and I'm honored to have you here. Bob Crippen.
Thank you, Thad. And Abe, yes, the Navy has a great test pilot school. It's at Patuxent River, but I was one of the Navy guys that got lost, and I went to Edwards, where you went. But, well, it's a real pleasure for me to be asked to speak at this event today. Bob Lawrence's death in an F-104 at Edwards was a terrible accident. I was privileged to know this brilliant young man, and he had a great future ahead of him if he had not been lost 50 years ago today. Bob was brilliant. He graduated from high school at 16. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry at 20, and he joined the Air Force out of his ROTC program. And then he earned his wings and went on after his tour in Germany, came back to Ohio State to get a PhD. So he was definitely on the fast track. I met Bob when he attended the test pilot school out at Edwards and was selected as an astronaut on the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, MOL. Bob was selected in the third group that we have the picture of here along with Abe. I have been selected in the second group. With Bob's PhD, he was definitely the smartest person that we had in the crew. More importantly, was his personality. As Abe pointed out in that bottom picture, he really had an infectious smile. You couldn't help but like the guy with the first time you met him. Yes, he was the first African-American selected to fly in space. And if it had really happened that he had flown, he would have been famous. That actually worried the security people on the Manned Orbiting Laboratory program because it was highly classified and he was so visible. They really wanted all of us crew members to be invisible, especially when we went out to contractors. The mission of MOL was only declassified like 2 years ago. And our mission was to spy on Russia. That never happened. But Bob was going through the early phase of MOL training. When they graduated from the test pilot school, it took a while to vet members that were selected for MOL for their security clearance. So they had an advanced course at Edwards, which they were going through. And during that phase, it's sometimes hard to get flight time. And Bob wanted to go fly, and he managed to talk one of the instructors out of a flight that he was going to take with a new instructor that was just learning how to fly these approaches that Abe described, which were low L/D or lift to drag approaches. And this new instructor had gone out and he'd kind of screwed up, so they wanted him to get a reflight, and the instructor that had been with him that day was going to do it, but Bob, being well versed in those approaches, talked the guy into letting him take the flight. Abe described the approach that was probably the toughest one to fly, that were trying to simulate what we call lifting bodies were like, and there were a couple of ones being tested over at NASA. And it is, the F-104 has got a pretty streamlined airplane, but when you do what Abe described and you drop the landing gear, put the flaps full down, put speed brakes out, it has a lot of drag. And that did a pretty good simulation. Now the space shuttle, when it comes in, it's got a glide slope of about 19 degrees. With the approach that we were talking about for the dirty L/D, you're coming in at about 25 degrees. And knowing when to flare and how hard to flare is a real challenge sometimes. And that's what the new instructor had been having a problem with. Well, 50 years ago today, they were doing one of those approaches, and the guy misjudged his flare. He hit the runway very hard, tore the landing gear off, burst into flame, bounced up. The new guy in the front seat ejected. Bob ejected also, but by that time the attitude and the altitude were such that it was not survivable. The guy that got out, he was hurt pretty severely also. We had 14 crew members left at that time. We all attended the funeral in Chicago. That's where I met Barbara. The program was canceled 2 years later, June 10th, 1969, one of the lowest days of my life. It went away for various reasons, political, financial, technical. But it so happened that NASA decided that they could use some of the crew. And even though they didn't have any flights till something they were working on called a space shuttle, which was about a decade down the road, they offered everybody that was 35 and under the opportunity to come to NASA in the astronaut office. Abe was 36. He was really PO'd. The 35, though, was the number they'd been using for when they were selecting new people. Bob would have been under 35 at the cancellation. So he would have been offered the opportunity to go to NASA and fly eventually on the space shuttle. And I'm sure he would have taken him up on it. If he had, he would have been the first black person to fly in space. And he would have been famous. And he's still famous with a lot of us. And he is still missed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Crippen. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to honor Major Robert Lawrence, Jr. and his family. As you can see, this is a remarkable human being, and it was a remarkable loss. But he's still with us. He's still inspiring, and his accomplishments will inspire many in the future. And he made a major contribution to America's human spaceflight program. So even after 50 years of that tragic accident, his memory continues and will grow. His passion for knowledge, people, and space is unparalleled. As we transition in the ending of this ceremony, I'd like to give a few little directions. I'd like for the family members first to begin to walk out to the Astronaut Memorial Space Mirror. It's the memorial that we have just east of here, where we have engraved 25 American heroes, astronauts that have lost their lives on mission and training. So I'd like to ask the families our special guests and our families to first rise and begin to walk. We have individuals that will help escort. And then as the family members start to leave, the rest of us can follow and escort them, where we will have a reflame.